looking at planning for physics teaching. My name is Patrick AJ. Now, at the end of this session, you should be able to explain what is meant by planning in physics teaching. Then describe the preparations a physics teacher must make before the actual classroom action. Then list the advantages of planning for physics teaching. And finally, state the limitations of pre-instructional planning. So let's look at the concept of planning. And when we say planning, what comes to mind? So you realize that planning will basically talk about the various things that you have to put in place to ensure that your teaching and learning is well organized, is in place, and it follows that sequence. So planning can be thought of as a sequential decision-making process. And because it is sequential, it is one of the most important characteristics of any effective physics teacher. So any teacher who does not plan before going to the physics classroom is not an effective teacher. So to be an effective teacher, one key feature of such a teacher is the teacher who plans before instruction. And what are some of the reasons that you must plan? What are some of the reasons for planning before an instruction? And it is very important for you to plan before the actual action or before the actual teaching, because it gives you guidance to effective teaching. It ensures desirable learning by students. Planning is able to help you assess the learning that is taking place. And it is also able to monitor student learning. So once you plan, you are able to monitor the learning of your students. And planning also enables you, the teacher, to institute measures in advance to overcome both ineffective teaching and learning. So once you plan, you have a whole lot of teaching strategies or techniques that you are going to employ in your teaching or during the teaching learning process. And so once you find out that a particular teaching approach is not working, you are able to switch from one teaching approach to another. However, if you fail to plan before going, you realize that you will just be fumbling, you will just be repeating yourself, repeating the same kind of thing for some period of time. And when that happens, you realize that you don't feel comfortable in the classroom. So what are some of the guidelines that you need for planning physics instruction? What guidelines do you need as a teacher? And we must understand that several decisions and measures need to be taken before the actual lesson in the classroom. And so some of the guidelines that you need in your decision taking include what, why, when, how, with what or who, and how will you know. So let us consider these decision making in the teaching learning process. So let us look at the what. What should go into the teaching? What am I going to teach? So when we talk about the what, this is the first thing you must do as a teacher in the planning process. You do this in order to identify the topic to be taught as well as the activities that should go with the content you have selected. And the topic and activities you select should be taken from the physics teaching syllabus. The topic should be adequate and realistic for the duration of the lesson, and it should be relevant to the students. So you are going to teach a 1-hour lesson, and you have selected a topic like you want to teach forces, that is definition of forces. You want to teach the effects of forces, the types of forces. You want to go into friction alone. Now you realize that this cannot be achieved in that 1-hour period. So you must always ensure that the topics that you select to teach, the various subtopics are realistic to be achieved in the said duration. Now let's look at the why. Why am I going to teach? So having selected your topic, you must now give a consideration motivation to why the particular topic should be taught. And here, what is to be achieved by your teaching? What must your learners gain after going through that set of instruction? And this demands you, the teacher, specifying the specific objectives of your lesson. So the why will now give you the direction as to the kind of learning experiences that your learners are supposed to go through. Now, when? And when we talk about the when, we are not referring to the time. So the when to teach is not referring to the time that is indicated on the school's timetable. We know that every school has a timetable, and the timetable has already allocated the various times within the day that you will teach physics. But here, we are talking about the learner's readiness or their characteristics. And some of the characteristics of the learner includes their level of intellectual development, their entering capability or their entry behavior, what we commonly refer to as the relevant previous knowledge. These are some of the characteristics about the learner we must consider, and the learner's motivation to learn and what you can do about it. So we must identify all this before the actual teaching goes on in the classroom. Now, how do we do it? So you must now take a decision on how you will teach your selected topic. And many teaching strategies and techniques are available for use. So the teacher, you can choose to go by demonstration, illustrations. It can be an inquiry activity. It can be through discovery. It can be through a problem solving. Note that one single technique cannot be used in all your lessons. So it means sometimes you have to combine 2 or 3 techniques to teach a particular concept. All these teaching learning strategies are at your disposal, and you can use them to maximize the teaching of a particular concept in the physics syllabus. And so as a teacher and a physics teacher for that matter, you must select the appropriate strategy or the strategies for teaching the selected topic. Now with what or who? So here, we are referring to the appropriate teaching learning resources that will support the teaching learning process. And here, teaching learning resources that can support the teaching learning process include resource persons, the laboratory apparatus or equipment, charts, models. All these are teaching learning resources or materials that can support the teaching learning process. And these are not used in isolation. So you must understand that the various teaching learning resources at our disposal are combined with the teaching learning strategies to enhance effective teaching and learning in the physics classroom. Now, how will you know? So how do you determine that your learners have really learned? So teaching is done in order to bring about a desirable change in the behavior of a learner. And that's the basic reason for teaching. Anytime we teach to bring about a change in the behavior of the learner. But how will we know that our teaching has resulted in a behavioral change of our learners? Unless we assess them. So once we assess our learners, we can find out whether there is a change in their behavior or not. And so, as part of your planning for teaching, you need to select appropriate procedure that will help you to assess your students before, during, and at the end of your lesson. Why should we do these things? We assess our students before teaching the topic, and this will help us to know their entry behavior. So, we always assess their relevant previous knowledge to find out what students already know about the concepts we are coming to teach before we start our main teaching. And we also assess in the course of the instruction to find out whether students are really getting an understanding of what is being taught. And we also assess students at the end to help you, the teacher, to determine the extent to which the behavioral change have occurred in your students. And this also helps you as a teacher to assess your own effectiveness. So as to whether the teaching methodologies or strategies you use, whether they were effective or not. Once you assess your learners at the end of the instruction, you are able to identify the effectiveness instructional materials and techniques that you use. What are some of the advantages that you gain as a teacher in your pre-instructional planning? And some of the advantages are it helps you to know what you need to teach and you master it. It helps you to know the specific lesson objectives. So once you start the lesson, you know what your learners should achieve at the end of the lesson. And it helps you to also select appropriate teaching learning strategies and techniques. It also helps you to know the teaching sequence, and this avoids you from teaching back and forth, from fumbling in the classroom. And it also makes prior arrangement for resource persons. So when you are in the course of your planning, when you find out there is a concept that there is somebody, a resource person who can deliver on that, you are able to identify this and make arrangement for the resource person during your pre-instructional planning stage. It also helps you to know the assessment procedures to use in the lesson. And it helps you to choose appropriate teaching learning materials for the lesson. Now, what are the limitations? You realize that pre-instructional planning has a lot of advantages. However, there are some disadvantages to this. And the disadvantages to the pre-instructional planning is that it is a time-consuming process. You need time to plan before you go to the classroom. And secondly, it makes some teachers think it makes them inflexible in that they have to stick to what they have decided on no matter the situation they find themselves. Now, students, in this session, we discuss the preparations that you as a physics teacher, you need to make before the actual delivery of your lesson.